thanks for being with us. My name is Anna Persic. I'm very happy to work for UNESCO, the United Nations agency in charge of education, science, and culture. And very happy to be here with you today. Very happy for UNESCO to be part of this project and also to learn from this project, which focuses on European science diplomacy, and to see how some of the lessons learned can also be shared with the rest of the world, and vice versa, how some of the good experiences and practices from other regions, from other countries, can also influence science diplomacy in Europe. I'm very happy that today we have a panel that will be discussing about open science and what is the influence of this new way of doing science on science diplomacy. I'm sure that many of you have heard of open science. It really is an exciting new movement in the scientific field, let's say, or let's say the scientific systems, where the idea is really to make science more accessible, to make it more transparent, more collaborative, more inclusive, and more equitable. We have seen through the past years that while the knowledge is very much expanding in different parts of the world, the knowledge gaps between the North and the South, between developed and developing countries, are also expanding. And we are really hoping that open science can be a tool to bridge those gaps. And if we also combine it with science diplomacy, it looks like there really is a potential there to use open science diplomacy to bridge these knowledge gaps and also to help all countries achieve their developmental, peace, and other aspirations. So again, I'm very happy to be here with you today. We are in a context where open science is not just a priority for Europe, it is becoming a priority for the world. The UNESCO's 193 member states have just adopted last November a UNESCO Recommendation on open science. It is a global legal instrument that sets standards and norms for open science across the world. And I'm very happy that today we have with us as keynote Ambassador António Sampaio from Lisbon, from Portugal, who was instrumental in making sure that this recommendation is adopted by the member states of UNESCO. So many of you know Professor Nóvoa. He's a professor now here at the University of Lisbon. He was rector of the University of Lisbon from 2006 to 2013. And as I said, we were very happy to have him as Ambassador of Portugal to UNESCO for 2018 and 2021. Very happy to hear about your experience in the field of open science and how you see it linked to science and policy. Ambassador.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to all. Thank you for the organizers of this conference for inviting me. Thank you for the colleagues from the Nova University and from the School of Science and Technology. Welcome to you all. It's a pleasure to talk to you, to give you some minutes about the UNESCO recommendation on open science, as part of your reflections on science diplomacy, diversity, and the global south. We live, we all know, in a very difficult moment. We are suspended in time because of a horrible invasion, of an unacceptable war. We live a kind of a feeling of failure of science and reason, failure of diplomacy and sensitivity, failure of our common humanity. But if the war can start again, we too can start again peace, our efforts for peace, without any compromise, but with the deep conviction that it's our duty, the most important of our human duties. It is in this struggle for peace that I would like to describe my talk about open science, which will be more to tell you a story than to advance a theoretical elaboration. I do it without any innocence, namely about science, so often in the service of the worst causes and interests. But refusing innocence does not mean falling into cynicism or skepticism. as José Saramago, Nobel Prize winner for literature, said in Madrid in 2003, and I'm quoting, "They want war, but will not leave them in peace." The day at that time was very different from nowadays, but it doesn't matter. Our struggle is always the same. Allow me then a personal memory. In 2012, 10 years ago, I was president of the University of Lisbon, facing huge economic difficulties due to the crisis experienced in Portugal, a country then dependent on the Troika. In the midst of the cuts to which I was forced, namely in the salaries of professors and staff, I did everything possible and impossible to keep subscriptions to journals and access to knowledge alive. At that time, I believe that around April 2012, I received a statement from the richest university in the world, Harvard University, with an annual operating budget 25 times that of Lisbon, saying, and I quote the statement of Harvard 2012, "Major periodical subscriptions cannot be sustained. Continuing these subscriptions on their current footing is financially untenable. Costs are now prohibitive. In a word, Harvard cannot afford journal subscriptions." For me, 10 years ago, it was a kind of a wake-up call, a moment of awareness of a problem that many people in the world were already aware of. Since then, I have tried to contribute to a movement that has gained space and influence in the world around open access and later around open science. Thus, when I arrived at UNESCO as Ambassador of Portugal in April 2018, the day I presented my credentials to the Director General André Azoulay, I proposed to involve UNESCO in two initiatives, one of which was the elaboration of a recommendation on open science. Why a recommendation and why on open science? Firstly, because UNESCO, maybe you are not aware of that, but UNESCO is an institution with a small budget. In fact, the annual budget of UNESCO is lower than the budget of the University of Lisbon. The UNESCO is an institution with a small budget, but with great symbolic power and influence. The approval of a standard-setting instrument like a recommendation was, in my opinion, the right way to include UNESCO in this movement of open science. Secondly, because UNESCO's main strength is its ability, as in many cases in diplomatic institutions, is its ability to insert itself into existing dynamics, giving it visibility and placing its symbolic power at the service of the scientists, groups, and associations that have been fighting for open science for a long time. The process of elaborating this recommendation took place very quickly, thanks mainly to the Assistant Director General for UNESCO, the Assistant for Natural Science of UNESCO, Shamila Nair Bedwell, and the coordination of our moderator today, Hannah Percy, and many other people that were involved. And the recommendation, as Anna has just said, was approved unanimously during the UNESCO General Conference in November last year, in November 15, 2021. It is an important step that shows, above all, that science and scientists have in UNESCO an open entity that can help to promote and give a global scale to many initiatives and scientific movements. Of course, we all know that the concept of open science cannot be taken literally. Open science is a kind of a metaphor to explain a set of movements and trends that in the world seek to uphold the importance of knowledge sharing, collaboration between scientists, and a greater presence of science in society. We must not be naive in the way we think about science, especially in light of the fabulous profits of the arms or pharmaceutical industries. But that doesn't stop us from considering that despite everything, science remains one of the most important promises for a common world. Simply put, in the dynamics of open science, we are interested above all in 3 points, in 3 issues. The first, the most obvious one, is open access. It is clear that not everything should be open and that there are legitimate interests, particularly those of scientists, that must be protected. This is so obvious that it shouldn't even be necessary to say, but unfortunately, it still is, so as not to hear demagogic comments that are still heard. The most important point, and this has been made very clear in the guidelines of recent years in the European research area, the most important point is that publicly funded research should be accessible to the public. It is not acceptable that public money is captured by powerful private interests. What is financed by all must be accessible to all, unless there is some compelling reason to do otherwise. In this area, UNESCO has acted consistently, both in the 2017 recommendation on science and scientific researchers and in the recommendation on open educational resources adopted in 2019 and in many other documents and decisions. The second, less obvious point about open science has to do with scientific culture. This recommendation is built on the idea that it is essential to foster scientific culture in contemporary societies in order to allow a better understanding of physical and social phenomena, especially in a time of so much false, prejudicial, and even dangerous information. The astonishing expansion of digital possibilities forces us more than ever to critically watch over information and news. Censorship is not an acceptable alternative, but the deepening of scientific culture can and must be a common good. This goal is also consistent with the need to promote scientific literacy, as advocated in the UNESCO report on the future of education, released also in November last year with the title Reimagining Our Futures Together, a New Social Contract for Education. Much of this agenda is present in the defense, in the promotion of a citizen science clearly contained in the UNESCO recommendation on open science. The third and last point concerns the importance of science for our collective life, namely in the field of public policies. At a time when so many dictatorships take over the world, and often do so from a discourse that denies science, it's urgent to sustain the role of science in the formation of public policies. What is true at national level is also true at global level, as can be seen in the debates on climate change or the recent debates on the coronavirus pandemic. Today, political decisions about life in the polis know no borders. It is this awareness that makes institutions like UNESCO even more necessary. But dear colleagues, in addition to these three themes, 3 points that I've just raised, there is an aspect directly related to your conference and which was central to the widespread support for the recommendation within the 193 countries that belong to UNESCO. I'm referring to the awareness that science, or the lack of it, is one of the central issues that explains inequalities in the world, namely between the global south and the global north. In fact, if education indicators continue to be those that best explain inequalities at the individual level, science indicators in the world are those that best explain inequalities between countries and regions. Strengthening the global south is, above all, reinforcing its scientific knowledge production and technological capabilities. Of course, upstream an education effort is needed. Of course, downstream, it's necessary to have conditions and contexts that allow development. But the role of science is central and decisive and has not always been adequately highlighted. Let's do it now within the scope of open science. Obviously, and it should be unnecessary to say it, but let's say it all the same. In the open science agenda, there is a call to value diversity, both from the point of view of different epistemologies of knowledge and from the perspective of multilingualism. It is not by chance that at UNESCO there was strong diplomatic support for this recommendation from the countries of the Global South. A recommendation is just a recommendation, I know. But this recommendation is worse, above all, for the visibility it gives to efforts and movements that for a long time have been manifesting themselves in the field of science and in universities. If UNESCO can help these movements, it will have already fulfilled its role as a United Nations agency specialized in the areas of education, science, and culture. A final word to tell you that given the amazing technological developments of recent years, open science almost seems like a scene of the past, but it's not. Although the debate must now extend to the need to consider access to digital and access that is decisive today for the full exercise of democracy and citizenship, to consider access to digital as a new human right to be inscribed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But this is already another and a different debate that is already presented in the UNESCO report about reimagining our futures together, a new social contract for education. But it's another theme. Let us, for now, focus on the debate on open science, which, as in this conference, must receive special attention from diplomacy, from science diplomacy, to fight dictatorships, all dictators with the weapons of reason, the weapons of science, the weapons of an open, democratic, shared science, of a citizen science. This is one of the strongest possibilities that we have for building a common world, a world in common, at peace with the earth and at peace with others. Let us fulfill our human duties vis-à-vis our human rights today more than ever. Thank you.